Hello, I'm going to talk about this week's readings from this book, The Individualized Society. It is chapters 3, which we kind of began last week a little bit, and then chapters 4, 5, and 6. So I'll share screen with this presentation and hopefully talk through some of the concepts. And what I mean by road sign is just like these concepts. If you're driving down a road, the road signs kind of tell you where you're going or give information. There's like near UCR, there's donkeys crossing. That's a charming aspect about Riverside. And so these concepts are just things that I've highlighted. And again, if you have different takeaways, that's okay. And when we have quizzes, the quizzes will focus a bit more on the theorists from the classical sociological theory textbook that's just barely out of reach for me right now to hold up. Um, all right, I'll grab it first. No, I'm already sharing screen. Uh, but here it is. Classical sociological theory. You see it in the corner of the screen. Um, we're not reading that textbook in this class because it's huge. It's too much to read. So we're reading two smaller books that start to stack up, and instead of exploring a gazillion different theorists in the reading, we're just exploring two theorists and then using them using all the other classical theorists we learn about in the smaller video lectures as reference points. So I have a Weber video prepared, but I still need to edit some things because some people walked in, someone came to our apartment like uh canvassing for a campaign, I think. So The Individualized Society by Zygmunt Bauman. And chapter 3, the chapter titles of this book are kind of fun. Uh This one's called Freedom and Security, The Unfinished Story of a Tempestuous Union. And in Zygmunt Bauman's writing, including this book, freedom and security, this tension is a really uh, hotly contested tension. It's something that is really an important part of his theory about the world. So it's a struggle because when we get a lot of freedom, we sometimes sacrifice security. And in the chapters we read this week, we see this kind of market freedom where we can buy a lot of cool stuff at stores. And even since the book was published, shopping online has exploded. We can order anything, but it's all with money, and we lack security when we lack money because our needs are not guaranteed through social safety nets. So these chapters kind of explore that dynamic. And when talking about freedom and security, he explains a bit about we need some freedom, we need some security. Both of them are things we need. But sometimes if you get more freedom, it sacrifices security. So getting more freedom, like losing a job, you have free time, but then you sacrifice the security, the income that that job provided, or maybe you want to have loose gun legislation. So people can have as many rounds of ammunition with them anywhere and automatic weapons with them anywhere, just going shopping. Uh, that would not be a very secure society. That'd be kind of scary. People with these crazy killing machines. So that would be a too much freedom that would sacrifice security in that realm of that kind of legislation. So you could think of anything, um, different hours, like a park closing after dark. It limits people's freedom, but the payoff is you get more security if that park's right next to your house where your kids are sleeping. So stuff like that. Um, but it's important to remember that they're not polar opposites. It's not like all the time more freedom means less security. It's just it's kind of a trend, and he brings up countless examples in the different books he writes. So in chapter 3, some more themes is exploring individualization. So this process that, it's the individualized society is the name of the book. So individualization is a societal process that happens as history progresses. It's a macro level kind of thing, and it's not necessarily uh, just one person getting more unique, but individualization of a society means people are kind of receding away from their communal bonds. And we'll see in ensuing chapters more how he kind of talks about the mechanisms through which this occurs, especially the decline of the welfare state. A good quote from page 50 is the yawning gap between the right of self-assertion and the capacity to control the moral settings which render such self-assertion feasible or unrealistic seems to be the main contradiction of second modernity, one that through trial and error, critical reflection, and bold experimentation, we would need to collectively learn to collectively tackle. So self-assertion and capacity to control the settings under that self-assertion that self-assertion occurs. So it's basically like you can buy whatever clothes, express yourself however much you want, but the conditions of making money, the market landscape is like a chaotic sea of forces that is beyond any one ordinary person's control. Of course, if you have a ton of money, then you start to have a bit more power, and there's this class differentiation like we saw in the Marx lecture between capitalists and workers. Um, and then Max Weber, when I upload that video, has a more nuanced view of that kind of social stratification. Another key tension that Bauman introduces or talks about a bit in chapter 3 is the separation of power and politics. And he's pointing out how elections are times when we vote for representatives, and those representatives decide policies. We don't necessarily have, in most places, like a participatory budget, but there are some places like Porto Alegre in Brazil is famous for having half of its budget be participatory. So the people actually vote on how to allocate half of their public money. So they have all kinds of social safety nets, programs that help people get what they need instead of investing public funds, like happens oftentimes in very narrow things, especially in America. We dedicate a lot of our public funds actually towards our foreign policy, which maintains this military power around the globe, but it can also cause a lot of instability around the globe that leads to a lot of immigrants arriving on US shores. And then Bauman writes about this in lots of his books, where people uh, grow xenophobic sentiments when there's lots of immigrants and instead of welcoming other people. Um, and in the separation of power and politics, uh, what we vote on is trivial compared to what the most powerful individuals decide in private rooms, and ordinary individuals simultaneously become more concerned with their own private affairs rather than public issues. So it's like um, some little small thing right where you are, and there's nothing wrong with being concerned about how loud the leaf blower is next door. That's something you can fight a battle for, but uh, any individual is not going to have an easy time really shifting the levers of power in society as people might dream of when thinking about democracy in the abstract. It would take a more participatory budget structure like in Porto Alegre. So chapter 4, Modernity and Clarity, the story of a failed romance. So in this chapter, the concept of reason is explained a little bit, and reason kind of echoes Max Weber and his idea of rational action and calculated reason. So that's sort of like the fuel for bureaucracy is doing things efficiently and according to utility, according to the weighing of costs and benefits. Um, but in especially in liquid modernity, stuff is kind of unclear. This ambivalence is a feeling when there isn't a set direction for us to apply our capacity of reason to. So it's hard to make up your mind, oh, should I focus on taking care of my baby or should I try to work an extra shift at my job? There's costs and benefits that really are tough choices to make, and people are spread too thin. And it's this precariousness that leaves people with a sense of fear. Like, am I going to end up sleeping on the street? We see people really suffering all around us in everyday society, so we know it could be worse. We don't ask for a raise or fight too hard to better our own conditions. And this concept of reason is attached to this sense of ambivalence because it's this neoliberal reasoning, this um, people will privately solve their own problems and don't try to have any kind of public socialized benefits that protect people like a welfare state has. So uh, a nickname for reason Bauman calls social mathematics. That sounds, you know, not so fun. And like I mentioned, reasons tied to Weber's idea of rational action. And Bauman kind of, without going getting too lost in a gazillion historical examples, kind of characterizes in a general sense modernization. This is solid modernization. So like Henry Ford era, 1800s, 1900s, people seeked to create a clear order in how life worked. And I think on a subsequent slide, I mentioned the phrase creative destruction, but you're kind of paving over some historical some ways that things have historically been set to be. But modernization means, creating clear categories, making sense of things, making clear, rational choices through reason. And Bauman says order keeping in human affairs. And this is following this kind of rational thinking. It's an effort to manipulate probabilities of some events happening and some other events not. So Bauman sees this as a goal, as an ideal that during modernization and solid modernity, governments, people were striving for is to create order. And we'll see this when there's a mini lecture on Auguste Comte. He had this highest value of that's like human progress is creating a more organized, neat, and tidy society. But Bauman kind of rejects this. He, of course, lived through in communism in the Soviet Union, and then also through the kind of private bureaucracy that's pretty similar in capitalist countries like the UK, where he's lived for many, many decades too. So he saw kind of this effort of creating order as being somewhat in vain, although not pointless. It's never going to get finished. But creating order and making a more fair and just society, of course, is a worthwhile effort to engage in. Um, and a key thing he says during this chapter is human civilizations we inhabit are more like historical accidents over hundreds of generations of life than the result of some big plan. So the world we inhabit from all the previous generations, it's all these different people kind of choosing things bit by bit. It's not like there's one big plan that people are executing like someone would in an organization that's highly rationalized nowadays. We have a 3-month plan to build these new townhouses. We have these funds from insurance from the previous law. There's so many factors that you just calculate, get the inputs, order the materials, make sure everything arrives on time, have wiggle room for things to not go perfectly, and then you have new townhomes and voila. So order building and order keeping in human affairs is an effort that people ought to engage in, but sometimes it has a totalitarian tendency where people try to control things too much. And again, back to our freedom and security um, comparison, this is also related to order keeping, making things more secure, but it limits freedom. And it limits predictability too. So fighting ambivalence through the law, which is a solid modern strategy, that kind of gets abandoned as we enter liquid modernity. And it's partially due to this neoliberal ideology, which values private enterprise rather than state planning. And in this type of world that we live in, there's still the same amount, if not more, bureaucracy, more rational rules following people and organizations functioning, but they're kind of competing with each other, and it's all chaotically with between organizations, a web of different kind of truces and networks of relationships, but people are not necessarily cooperating in everyone's interest, but they're kind of politicking, competing with each other. Um, so there's this new legislating force. An authoritarian bureaucracy comes from the privately owned and transnational corporations. So these big organizations that have lots of people working in them, planning where to build the next factory, the next mine to get the resources to build the things. the new programs to take care of the elderly. There are these for-profit companies, whether they're making shoes or uh, offering garden supplies. Everything is part of this kind of free market system where people are not following one big cohesive plan, but still rationalizing things on a small scale. Sorry, I got sidetracked there for a second. So, like I said previously, modernity is an art of creative destruction. So, creative destruction is like doing art by like blowing something up. And that, there's these legacies of historical accidents that have paved the road to the present moment, but some things we want to eliminate, like homophobia is something that maybe historically was taken for granted, but now people are can recognize it for what it is and think like I'd rather live in a world that's more accepting of people of different sexualities. And so there's some of this creative destruction that's really a force for good, and it's up to you and your own moral standards what's good and what's not. Um, but Bauman definitely, as we'll see on the slides to come, values Emmanuel Levinas's morality, his moral system of being existing for the other. I'm getting ahead of myself though. More key points. In liquid modernity, society evolves to be a society of consumers rather than a society of producers. So this means that people are just earning money however they can earn money and then using it to buy things, and that's really what their job is as as a person, is to be a good consumer, to participate in consumption, to watch TV, buy their food, buy their insurance, buy their cars, buy their gas, get new clothes, follow the styles and trends, watch commercials. That's what drives the society of consumers, is this participation by consumers. Whereas in the past, it really was a society of producers. It was a lot of soldiers, a lot of factory workers, a lot of unpaid care work in the home, a bit more structure and order and people following norms. And they were producing things and building a lot of infrastructure that literally paved the road into the world that we inhabit today. And this is already kind of recent in history that this was solid modernity and then liquid modernity. It's all just within like our grandparents' generations or our great grandparents' generations. And human history is so much longer than that. A good quote at the end of this chapter, towards the end, is the market keeps ambivalence alive, and ambivalence keeps the market alive. So this is kind of hinting at how a lot of our needs and wants and desires are created by advertising and marketing and just following what your neighbors have. And that ambivalent feeling of, am I doing life right? Do I have enough? Do I need to get more? Gets satisfied through market transactions. And those market transactions done by one person get seen by another person, fueling more ambivalence and more market transactions. And in this climate where people are feeling kind of insecure, they're feeling a bit uneasy about their life situation and their ability to sustain it, then there is this threat. And Bauman's writing this in 2000, 2001. So there's such a big rise in anti-immigrant sentiment since then. And he's right that this climate, there's this neo-tribal us versus them fundamentalist sentiments where people don't blame the markets that are actually creating a lack of jobs or lack of good opportunities in life at a certain locality, because capital can float around the globe and invest somewhere else, hire people who will work for lower wage. Instead, there's a tendency where people just kind of say, it's us versus them. Those are the bad people. They look different. And then also in war conflicts, I mean, Israel-Palestine right now, a lot of neo-tribalism where people will pick a side and the other side's totally evil, and you see the atrocities that are capable of being had when you see others in such a dehumanized context. So this is kind of an awkward transition. Now, am I my brother's keeper? Or it's quite a fitting transition because chapter 5 is really an awesome chapter. It's about social work. I know some of you wrote down that you were interested in social work on your autobiographical posters. So sorry, the file is too, I'm trying to find a way to upload it, but it seems like really tough because the file's too big. Anyway, this chapter is about morality as seen through social work and welfare and social safety nets. Social safety nets and welfare are like programs that give people food if they can't afford food, programs that give people housing if they can't afford housing. And that's really evolved and dissolved in recent years. You can still get SNAP, you can still get some benefits, but it's not the same as it used to be. Plus, the commodification of basic needs like housing or transportation to get to work, um, the cost is rising immensely. So even if you get some kind of discount from the government, it's not taking care of your needs. You still have to work oftentimes several jobs just to get by. So this is, a couple decades ago again that Bauman's writing this, and he's tracing the historical roots of the welfare state, and Max Weber would be happy that he's doing this. He's tracking multiple causes and listing them and sort of saying some people are arguing that this caused it, some people argue that that caused the welfare state, but really it's a combination of all these causes, and it's kind of a coincidence that these causes all came to being. So those causes are the state government needing industrial and military reserve army. So if people open a new factory or need to build a new bridge, or again, these is a society of producers, or there's a war, then it's a style of war that needs a large army actually fighting in combat instead of nowadays where it's sending drones and stuff like that. So you need people to be healthy and ready to serve the country for whether it's industry or military. And it was in the state's interest to have this healthy, content reserve army that would be receiving welfare benefits. Um, Another explanation is that the welfare state emerged because of a long struggle that trade unions and labor parties embarked upon to protect workers from the whims of markets. So don't fire me just because you'll be more profitable in another town. Uh, Another factor is the wish of the political establishment to diffuse dissent. So that's Bauman's terms. So basically, if people like in the struggle of labor unions and and the like are marching and protesting for higher wages and more job security, then the political establishment might get a little bit weary of that. Look in Bangladesh right now. There's people, so much of our clothes says made in Bangladesh because it's so cheap to pay people to work to make clothes. But they're not happy with that, and they're literally having a revolution right now, which is quite interesting. And then the last reason why the welfare state emerged is that the welfare state was a triumph of ethical intentions. People just thought it was the right thing to do, take care of the people who are in need. Um, on an individual level, driving past someone in a sleeping bag on the sidewalk can be pretty jarring, but we almost get numb because of how common it is. But Bauman points out that this is kind of a coincidence. It's a historical accident that there's all these different factors layering up to create this wonderful thing. In no way is it guaranteed that society will just progress towards a perfect welfare state. No, people sadly have their vices, and we see today there's immense greed at the top, and people have found really tricky, fancy ways of justifying in their minds, like, oh, I deserve all I have. Or you see sometimes recently there have been some Israeli war generals justifying torture of prisoners. I'm sorry to bring up such gruesome things, but you see how people can really um, uh, explain things in a way that is just one-sided instead of thinking about, wow, there's so many factors layering up, and this is kind of a coincidence. This is kind of magnificent. It's the magic of history and the complexity of the world. And that's something I appreciate from Zygmunt Bauman is that and it makes him hard to read because he's really flowing through a lot of complex ideas, and his writing is like he's trying to make it flowery and poetic, and he's not a native English speaker, so it's tough. I understand it. So there's more to this chapter. He's connecting the welfare state and taking care of other people and their suffering to morality. So like I mentioned, Emmanuel Levinas, he claimed, Bauman says he's the greatest ethical philosopher of our time. And Levinas he argues that morality is to do things for the other, for the person who's in need, for the person you don't know. Um, and people who are in the example of the welfare state, people left out of the labor force feel useless when markets have no use for them. So they're really down and out. It's really sad to not have much direction in life. And that's a need, an immense need that doesn't have a market-based solution because they're not the people who are in a position to buy products to solve their problems. So it's this immense need for caretakers. I this is my own wording where I include plants and animals need more caretakers because I think that's the job, if we all if we need to create more jobs, then jobs we could create are people to like pet cows so they're not suffering before we eat them. Like that would be awesome. Um, I'm getting sidetracked though. And same with farming and gardening, just making it more of a holistic thing. Taking that can solve some of the problems of taking care of people because people need things to do, and there's plenty of meaningful things out and about. Really connected with other life that can help people be healthy and live rewarding lives, but it is a bit outside of the marketplace. And that's a problem for social work too, because even though it's rewarding, it's also really hard work, and people ought to be paid if they're spending their time taking care of others. And it requires this kind of political, legal government choice of investing in social programs. And really, what we live in today is just a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket of what we should be enjoying with the technology we have in our world in terms of the amount of social work, just the quantity of people whose job it is to take care of others, their paid employment, um, and and also in terms of just the quality of this work. Bauman does have many pages citing another academic who studies in the Netherlands social workers and seeing how they're really spread thin and confused because they just have to check a bunch of boxes and then their clients are like, I didn't really get the help I need, and then the social worker has to move on to the next client. So, yeah, it requires a policy intervention, and a big jobs program for taking care of people, plants, and animals would be what I would demand my politicians to do. But that's just my opinion based on reading Bauman. Um, and so to conclude chapter 5, which, as I mentioned, is just an awesome chapter for sure. The welfare state and caring social workers have made a big difference in so many people's lives, even though it's an imperfect system that's underinvested in the places of the world that have much social workers. And even though a lot of popular media and political happenings are focused on sensational things that polarize people into us versus them, or attract free floating capital to invest based on fashions and fads, uh, based on, consumers shaping society that way. Uh, Having caring social workers is a really, really big benefit to society, but it's tough because it requires this moral, ethical choice rather than a market-driven, rational choice. So he concludes this chapter that by arguing that the quality of the society ought to be measured by the well-being of its weakest members, and warning that ethical standards of being my brother's keeper are under attack by this neoliberal ideology, which argues that markets will solve everything. And if you tax the rich and make a program that gives housing to homeless people, then you're going to destroy the world. It's this bogus ideology that unfortunately is really popular and powerful in the world because it really justifies the most rich people thinking, I'm perfect. And that's not a good thing. So chapter 6, the last chapter from this week, starts by just kind of talking about uncertainty that exists in the world of the dawn of liquid modernity. People notice that they lack control over their own lives, despite all the endless different brands of conditioner they can buy to make their hair feel soft, um, or fun things to watch on TV. He quotes another academic as calling this ambient fear of, am I going to lose my job soon? Am I not cool enough? Do I just not stack up to the rest of them? And advertising and marketing plays into this. So this kind of market-based, commodity-driven way of needing our needs and desires, our wants and needs. So Bauman compares this uncertainty in liquid modernity to solid modern times where there was this goal of more and more order, more administration, more control. And we still see the legacy of modernization in lots of the privatized bureaucracies, like in private companies, especially the big transnational corporations. He talks more about neoliberalism, how it's this deregulation, not having taxes on big companies or reducing them, and this moral blindness of market competition, that it's a waste of time to worry about morals. We're not going to deal with it. We're just going to trust the markets. It's the tearing up of this canceling of previous investment in social safety nets, and what the welfare state, these benefits that protect people from suffering and misery if they lose their job or they're disabled or otherwise unable to contribute to the economy just by getting a job, by selling their time and energy. So people used to meet lots of needs and wants organically, though, through family, friends, and community. You go to your neighbor, they have a tomato plant, they give you a tomato. But it's changed over time so that we meet our needs, wants, and desires, and even invented wants and needs through markets. So we're watching commercials that say, you got to get this. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, I do need to get that. And then you spend your money and get that. And then you need to earn more money. So you try to get a raise at your job and you don't worry about what your job's actually serving or working towards. You just need more money. And that's a tough predicament for the whole world if everybody's or many people are oriented in that way. So in in these accidents of history, people are oftentimes moving from smaller towns to bigger cities and suburbs. And in these liquid modern cities and suburbs, there's a lot of different cultures and people from people who have different family histories moving to the same place. And people are kind of distrustful of each other sometimes, but not all the time. And Hannah Arendt points out how there's this social harmony that there's a huge potential for in multicultural places where it sprouts from cultural difference, where people get to know each other and actually adopt and appreciate different parts of each other's cultures based on what they like. And I teach a class on sports, and sports is a really cool example of people who rally behind a same sports team in a city and grow to love sports together, even if it's not something that's from any one person's set culture. And then a great quote on page 95: the chance of human togetherness depends on the rights of the stranger, not the question of who, the state, or the ad hoc patched up tribe is entitled to decide who the strangers are. So if if you're fighting for some people to be oppressed, then you're not going to live in a very pro-social, um, tolerant, co cooperative, collaborative society. You're going to live in a society where people are distrustful of each other because, wait, is that person hoping for me to become dog food? Or does that person want me to be a fellow gardener and petting zoo visitor as the rest of us are in this utopia of just doing things that are peaceful and harmonious. So maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we definitely do live in times where people are kind of distrustful of each other, um, a little bit more backstabby than we ought to be if we want to live in a society that's more tight-knit, trusting, safer, more secure, and also more free. Back to the tension of freedom and security. So those are the slides from the chapters today. Pretty sure I talked for about an hour. So I'm so sorry that took so long, but I love Zygmunt Bauman and it's fun talking about him. And hopefully this helps you understand the chapters we got assigned this week. And great job, Stephanie showed me the discussions. People are doing just excellent work in this class so far. I'm so happy to be in this position to be able to facilitate this for everybody and get to cheer people on. So keep up the great work. And I'll be designing quiz 2 in the next 18 hours or so and then posting it tomorrow. Uh, I guess I'll also post the Weber video. So Marx Weber and then the Jane Addams readings, the Zygmunt Bauman readings. Nothing nitpicky, I hope, but it's obviously a subjective opinion whether something's nitpicky. But I'll do my best to make it kind of like, are you trying? Yes, I'll select the correct answer then. looked like it in the previous quiz. Actually, I might make it a tiny bit harder than the previous quiz because the previous quiz was really just like a welcome to the class thing. All right. Thank you for watching this. If you're still here, bravo. Not everybody's watching the whole video for sure, and I'm thankful that you are if you're here.